The first time I caught my wife lying, it was almost funny. Almost. She was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone like she hadn't even noticed me standing there. The rich scent of coffee filled the room, mingling with the faint trace of her expensive perfume, the one she only wore on special occasions. "Hey, babe," she said without looking up. "Mom and I are thinking of taking a little trip. Just a short getaway. You know, some girl time." I leaned against the counter, watching her. "Where to?" For the briefest second, something flickered across her face, so quick that if I hadn't been paying attention, I might have missed it. "Just a resort," she said, waving a hand like it was nothing. "Nothing crazy. Mom's been stressed, and I figured we could use some sun." I should have asked more questions. I should have caught how her voice was just a little too even, a little too casual. How she didn't quite meet my eyes. But I didn't. Why would I? She was my wife. So, I just nodded. 2 weeks later, Rachel and her mother, Diane, were off on their relaxing getaway. And like an absolute fool, I kissed her goodbye at the airport, completely unaware that I was kissing a lie. They got back on a Sunday afternoon. Rachel barely made it through the front door before dropping her suitcase and heading straight for the shower. Diane wasn't far behind, muttering something about needing to wash the trip off. I stood in the living room, watching them rush upstairs like they were trying to outrun something. It didn't sit right with me. And then came the doctor's visit. "We just want to get checked out," Rachel said when I asked about it. "You know, routine stuff. Travel messes with your system." Diane, stretched out on the couch flipping through a magazine, chimed in without looking up. "Yeah, sweetie, we always do this after a trip. No big deal." I turned to my father-in-law, Frank. He was watching them the same way I was, like a man who smelled smoke but couldn't see the fire. "You want to come with us?" he asked, his voice too casual. Rachel froze. Diane let out a laugh, but it was forced. "Oh, please. Men in a gynecologist's office? What a sight," she scoffed. Rachel tried to brush past me, grabbing her purse. "We'll be back soon." Frank and I exchanged a look. Neither of us said a word, but we both followed them out the door. The clinic was one of those high-end, glass-walled places where everything smelled like antiseptic and money. Rachel and Diane disappeared into an exam room while Frank and I sat in the waiting area, flipping through old magazines and trying to act like we weren't both suspicious as hell. Then the doctor stepped out. A nurse asked him something in a hushed voice, and he let out a sigh before responding, loud enough for anyone in the hallway to hear. "Well, considering the circumstances of conception, we'll need to run additional tests." Frank and I sat up at the same time. I felt my stomach drop, a cold, creeping dread wrapping itself around my chest. Rachel and Diane were still inside. They had no idea we'd just overheard those words. Conception. What the hell did he mean by conception? Frank and I locked eyes. That single word landed between us like a loaded gun on the table. My mind was already racing, scrambling for an explanation. Maybe we misheard. Maybe the doctor was talking about someone else. Maybe. The exam room door opened. Rachel stepped out first, adjusting the sleeve of her blouse, her face unreadable. But Diane, she looked pale, like the air had been knocked out of her lungs. For the first time since they got back, she actually looked nervous. They weren't expecting to see us standing there. And I'll never forget the split second before Rachel forced a smile, the way her lips parted in shock before she caught herself. "What are you guys doing here?" she asked, her voice just a little too casual. Frank spoke before I could. "We waited." Diane let out a dry chuckle, but there was no real humor behind it. "Oh, Frank. Don't tell me you're going all overprotective husband on me. We just had some checkups, that's all." I ignored her. My focus was on Rachel. What kind of checkup? Even I was surprised at the way my voice came out, steady, cold. Rachel's grip tightened around the strap of her purse. Just the usual. Blood work. A little dehydrated from the trip. She was lying. I could hear it in the unnatural rhythm of her voice, see it in the way her eyes refused to meet mine. Beside me, Frank exhaled sharply. That's weird, he said, his tone laced with sarcasm. Because we just overheard your doctor mention something about conception. The way both of them stiffened at the exact same moment, that was when I knew. Something was seriously wrong. Rachel let out a short, forced laugh. Wow. Eavesdropping now. That's classy. Diane jumped in, waving a dismissive hand. You must have misheard. Doctors talk about all sorts of things. But Frank wasn't letting this slide. He took a step closer to his wife, his voice lower now, more deliberate. So if I ask the doctor what he meant, he'll tell me exactly what you just did? Diane's jaw clenched. And Rachel? She didn't look guilty. She didn't look scared. She looked pissed. Oh my God, she snapped, crossing her arms. Are you seriously making a scene right now? We just got back from a trip. We're exhausted. And now you're accusing me of what? Being pregnant? Do I look pregnant to you? She was doubling down. Fighting back. And for just a second, a tiny flicker of doubt crept in. What if I had misheard? What if I really was making something out of nothing? But then Frank said something that shattered whatever hesitation I had left. I'm not stupid, Diane, he muttered, his voice trembling with restrained fury. Tell me right now. Are you covering for her? Diane didn't answer. She didn't have to. The way her eyes shifted away, the way her throat bobbed as she swallowed hard, that was all the confirmation we needed. Rachel was still ranting, still playing the part of the wounded victim, trying to spin this into some dramatic spectacle where she was being unfairly accused. But I wasn't listening anymore. I was looking at my wife, the woman I had built a life with, and realizing in real time that I had no idea who she really was. I took a slow step toward her. She stopped talking. And then, in the calmest voice I could manage, I asked, Rachel, whose baby is it? The color drained from her face. For the first time since this whole thing started, she looked genuinely caught off guard, like she hadn't expected me to slice straight through her performance. Excuse me, she said, her voice sharp, defensive. I didn't blink. Didn't move. I just let the question hang in the air between us. Whose baby is it? Diane shifted uncomfortably, casting a quick glance at her daughter. But Rachel wasn't looking at her. She was looking at me. And in that moment, I saw it, the calculation happening behind her eyes. The gears turning. She had two choices. Keep lying, dig in, gaslight her way out of this. Or admit the truth and try to control the damage. She chose option one. Wow, she scoffed, shaking her head. You are actually insane. Like, seriously, what is wrong with you? I just got back from a trip, and now you're standing in the middle of a freaking doctor's office, accusing me of being pregnant with someone else's kid? I didn't flinch. Frank stood silent beside me, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Diane, on the other hand, was fidgeting, wringing her hands like she wanted to say something but couldn't. I took a slow, steady breath, forcing my voice to stay calm. Controlled. I'll ask one more time, I said, enunciating each word. Whose baby is it? Rachel let out another scoff, rolling her eyes. Oh my God, you're insane. And then Frank snapped. Stop lying, Rachel. His voice thundered through the hallway, so loud that a passing nurse jolted in surprise. Diane gasped. Rachel flinched. I had never seen my father-in-law lose his temper before. But right now, standing in that cold, sterile hallway, it was clear, he had reached his breaking point. Frank's face was flushed red, his chest rising and falling in sharp, uneven breaths. His rage was barely held in check. When he turned to Diane, his voice dropped to a low, dangerous growl. "You knew, didn't you?" he hissed. "You knew this whole damn time." Diane swallowed hard, tears brimming in her eyes. But before she could get a word out, Rachel exploded. "Oh, for God's sake," she shrieked, throwing her hands up. "Fine. You want to know? You really want to know?" She spun toward me, eyes blazing with fury. "It's not yours." 3 words. Just 3 little words. And my world caved in. A deafening roar filled my ears. My pulse pounded against my skull. My breath caught in my throat. I had known. Deep down, the second I heard the doctor's words, I had known. But hearing her say it, with that voice, dripping with venom, spitting it out like an insult. It was like taking a bullet straight to the chest. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. Rachel rolled her eyes. "Oh, don't look so shocked," she snapped. "You wanted the truth. There it is. You happy now?" Frank stepped toward her, his voice low and dangerous. "Who?" Rachel let out a short, humorless laugh. "Like I'm gonna tell you that." And that was it. That was the moment something inside me broke. I had spent years loving this woman. Providing for her. Building a life with her. And now, she stood there, not just admitting she had betrayed me, but mocking me for it. My jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. My voice shook with barely controlled fury. "How long?" She smirked. "Long enough." That was it. That was the moment I knew, our marriage was dead. But what none of us knew, what none of us could have known, was that the biggest bombshell was still coming. Because just as Rachel was about to open her mouth again, we heard it. A voice. A man's voice. "I think it's time we stopped pretending." All of us turned at once. And standing there, arms crossed, looking completely unbothered by the chaos unfolding before him, was the last person I ever expected to see. The moment my eyes landed on him, my stomach dropped. Standing there, calm as ever, was Eric. My best friend. Rachel's eyes flickered toward him for the briefest second. Just long enough for me to catch the panic in them, before she masked it with anger. But it was too late. That split second told me everything. Beside me, Frank went rigid, his breath coming out in short, sharp bursts, like he was trying to keep himself from losing it completely. "Diane?" She paled instantly, her hand flying up to cover her mouth. "Rachel?" She said nothing. Eric took a step forward, his face unreadable. His dark eyes locked onto mine, and for a fleeting moment, I swore I saw it, the faintest trace of a smirk. "I think we should talk," he said smoothly. I could feel my pulse hammering in my throat. My best friend. The guy who stood beside me at my wedding. The guy who had cradled my newborn son in his arms, telling me how proud he was of me. The guy I had trusted with everything. I took a step toward him, my fists clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms. "Tell me you're joking," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Rachel let out an exasperated sigh, rolling her eyes. "Oh, for God's sake," she muttered. "Can we not do this here? This is so dramatic." Frank turned on her so fast it was like he had been shot out of a cannon. "You don't get to talk right now," he growled. For the first time, Rachel actually flinched. Eric, on the other hand, didn't even blink. He just tilted his head slightly, like this was nothing more than an inconvenience. "We should go somewhere private," he said again, like he actually thought he had any control over this situation. And that was when I snapped. "Tell me the truth, Eric." My voice thundered through the hallway. A passing nurse froze mid-step, eyes wide, before quickly turning and scurrying in the opposite direction. Rachel sighed again, rubbing her temples. "Oh my God," she groaned. "Calm down. You're embarrassing yourself." I whipped around so fast it made my head spin. "I'm embarrassing myself?" My voice cracked under the sheer weight of rage and devastation tightening around my throat. "And Rachel?" She smirked. She smirked. Like this was all just some petty argument I was blowing out of proportion. Frank was staring at Eric now, his expression unreadable. "You," he said slowly, his voice disturbingly calm. "You got my daughter pregnant?" Eric exhaled through his nose, then met my eyes directly. "I think we should sit down." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "You don't get to tell me what to do right now." Eric nodded slightly, like he accepted that, then turned back to Frank. "It was never supposed to happen like this." Rachel groaned. "Oh my God. Can we skip the dramatic speeches?" She folded her arms, leaning lazily against the wall, like this whole thing was just a minor inconvenience to her. I felt sick. Frank took a slow, deliberate step toward Eric. His voice was low, steady, dangerous. "How long?" Eric's facade cracked, if only slightly. His shoulders tensed. His jaw tightened. But it was Rachel who answered. 2 years, she said flatly. Everything stopped. A wave of dizziness hit me so hard I almost swayed. Frank's face turned eerily blank. Diane let out a sharp gasp. "And Eric?" He just stared at the floor. 2 years. 2 years of lies. 2 years of deception. 2 years of my wife sneaking off to be with him, and then crawling into bed beside me. My hands trembled. The blood rushing in my ears became a deafening roar. And then Rachel delivered the final blow. "Oh, don't look so shocked," she scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Honestly? I was getting bored with you anyway. I don't remember making the decision to move. I don't remember my body shifting forward. All I remember is Frank's arms slamming into my chest, holding me back as I lunged at Eric, blind with rage." Rachel shrieked, stumbling out of the way. "But Eric?" He didn't flinch. He just stood there, his jaw tight, watching me struggle against Frank's grip like this was all beneath him. "Not here," Frank hissed in my ear. "Not in a damn doctor's office." I was breathing hard, nearly shaking apart from the fury tearing through me. It took every ounce of restraint I had not to rip Eric apart right then and there. And then he did something I will never forget. He turned to Rachel. And he smiled. Not a smirk. Not a cocky grin. A small, soft, knowing smile. Like they were sharing a secret. Like none of us even mattered. That smile, barely there but impossible to miss, was what finally broke me. I stopped struggling. Stopped breathing so hard. Stopped everything. Because that smile told me something worse than all the lies. Worse than all the cheating. Eric wasn't afraid. He wasn't ashamed. He wasn't sorry. He thought he had won. Rachel turned to him, still leaning against the wall, still completely unbothered. And the look she gave him? Not guilt. Not regret. Amusement. Like the rest of us were just throwing a tantrum over nothing. I took a slow step back. Frank hesitated before finally releasing me, watching carefully, probably wondering if I was about to go for Eric again. But I didn't. Instead, I did something that surprised even me. I laughed. A short, breathless chuckle. The kind that slips out when your body doesn't know whether to scream or break down completely. Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Oh great," she muttered. "Here we go. Now he's going crazy." I ignored her. I just looked at Eric, my hands still trembling, but my voice eerily calm. You know what, man? I said. You actually did me a favor. Eric blinked. What? I let out another dry chuckle, shaking my head. You. Her. This. You just gave me the biggest wake-up call of my life. Rachel groaned dramatically. Oh, here comes the self-righteous speech. Frank turned to her so fast she actually flinched. Shut your mouth. His voice was pure steel. And for once, she did. I looked back at Eric. You're standing there like you just won some kind of prize, I said. Like you outplayed me. Like this is some big victory. Eric didn't respond. But I saw it, the flicker in his eyes. The brief, involuntary reaction. I had just hit exactly where I needed to. I took another step closer, lowering my voice. But let me tell you something, Eric, I said. You didn't win. You inherited a nightmare. Rachel scoffed. Oh, please. I ignored her. She's your problem now, I told him, my voice dripping with finality. Her lying. Her cheating. Her manipulative, selfish, gaslighting bullshit. That's all yours now, buddy. Eric's jaw tightened, his fists clenching at his sides. Rachel? She just laughed. You are so pathetic, she sneered. Seriously. Standing here, acting like you're some tragic hero, when in reality, you were the most boring husband on the planet. She folded her arms, tilting her head in mock pity. News flash. Maybe if you hadn't been so predictable, I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere. Frank actually growled under his breath. But I didn't flinch. I just smiled. Because I still had one more card to play. I turned back to Eric, lowering my voice just enough so only he could hear. Oh, and by the way, I whispered, leaning in slightly. I know about the other guy, too. Eric's entire face changed. His expression froze. His lips parted just slightly. His eyes flicked, just for a second, toward Rachel. And in that single, involuntary reaction, I had my answer. Rachel's smug grin faltered. What? I exhaled slowly, letting the silence stretch. I said, pretending to be thoughtful. Guess you weren't the only one after all, Eric. Eric turned to Rachel. Rachel turned to me. And for the first time since this whole disaster started, she actually looked nervous. For the first time, Rachel had lost control. She tried to keep her composure, but it was there, a flicker of hesitation, a brief moment of pure panic before she forced her expression back into indifference. Eric, though. He wasn't as good at hiding it. His face had drained of color. His jaw locked tight. His eyes burned into Rachel like he was seeing her for the first time. What the hell is he talking about? He asked, his voice low, tense. Rachel let out a short, sharp laugh. Oh, please, she scoffed. Don't be stupid. He's just trying to mess with you. I folded my arms, watching the cracks spread. I'm messing with him. I echoed. You sure about that, Jess? She turned to me, her eyes narrowing. Daring me. I smirked. Ask her where she was on May 14th. Her face dropped. Eric's head snapped toward her. What happened on May 14th? His voice was tighter now, controlled, but just barely. Rachel scoffed again, rolling her eyes. Oh my God. Do not tell me you're actually listening to this. Answer the question. Eric's voice boomed through the hallway. Rachel's mouth snapped shut. Silence. And then, finally, she hesitated. Too long. Way too long. Eric took a slow step back, realization hitting him like a freight train. He had thought he was the one pulling the strings. He had thought he was the winner in all of this. That he had stolen Rachel away from me. But now. Now he was seeing what I had just figured out myself. Rachel wasn't some prize. She was a walking disaster. A liar so tangled in her own web that even her side piece wasn't safe. I decided to help him out. "Let me refresh your memory," I said casually. That was the weekend she told me she was visiting her cousin in Chicago. I let that sit for a second before delivering the final blow. But guess what, Eric? She wasn't in Chicago. Rachel's entire body went rigid. Eric took another step back, shaking his head. "No," he muttered. "No, that's not." "Go ahead," I interrupted, my voice calm, almost amused. "Ask her where she really was. Ask her who she was really with." Rachel's eyes snapped to mine, and for the first time, I saw it. Fear. Pure, genuine, cornered animal fear. And damn, did it feel good. Eric was still staring at her, his breathing uneven. Waiting. Begging. For her to say something. Anything. Rachel's mouth opened. Then closed. Then opened again. And I swear, I saw the exact second she realized she had no way out. Her whole posture shifted. Her expression went blank. And then, she did the most Rachel thing possible. She shrugged. So what? 3 little words. That was it. That was all she had to say. Eric looked like he had been stabbed. Diane let out a choked gasp behind us. Frank ran a hand down his face, looking like he was seconds away from throwing up. And me? I let out a slow, low chuckle. Because this was beautiful. Eric had betrayed me. Rachel had betrayed me. And now, they were both drowning in the same sinking ship. Rachel sighed, exasperated, like we were the ones being difficult. Like this was just another inconvenience for her. "Look, it's not a big deal," Rachel said, exasperated. "You're all acting like a bunch of children. I had fun, okay? That's all it was. It didn't mean anything." Eric actually flinched. "It didn't mean anything," he repeated under his breath, like he was trying to process the words in real time. Rachel just rolled her eyes. "Oh, don't start." Eric's hands curled into fists at his sides. "You told me you loved me." Rachel let out a short, sharp snort. "Oh my God," she scoffed. "You actually believe that?" Silence. Pure. Devastating. Silence. And just like that, Eric knew. He wasn't special. He wasn't different. He was just another idiot she had used and tossed aside. Just like me. Rachel stretched her arms over her head, letting out a dramatic groan. God. This has been exhausting. Are we done here? Frank exhaled slowly, sharply. His hands were clenched so tight I thought he might snap. You are the most disgusting, selfish little. Rachel snapped her fingers at her own father. She interrupted. Save the lecture, Dad. I'm not interested. I turned to Eric, who still looked like he had been run over by a truck. And then, very softly, I said, Congratulations, buddy. She's all yours. Then I turned. And I walked away. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Behind me, I could hear Rachel scoffing, Eric breathing hard like he was trying to keep himself together, and Frank muttering curses under his breath. But none of it mattered anymore. I had my answer. Rachel wasn't just a liar. She wasn't just a cheater. She was proud of it. That was the part that made my stomach turn. The way she acted like all of this was just a mild inconvenience. Like we were the problem for caring. Like she had won. I had made it halfway down the hallway when I heard the footsteps behind me. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Eric. Hey. His voice was shaking, but he was trying to sound tough. Trying to act like he still had control over something. We're not done here. I stopped. Slowly. Took a deep breath. Then turned. Eric stood there, shoulders rigid, fists clenched tight. Like he was daring me to do something. Like I was the one who had wronged him. I stared at him for a long moment. Then I laughed. Right in his face. That made him even angrier. You think this is funny, he snapped. You think this is some kind of joke? I wiped at my face, still chuckling. Buddy, I said, shaking my head. You're standing there looking like you're about to punch me when I just did you the biggest favor of your life. Eric's jaw tightened. Screw you. I stepped closer. No. Screw you. He flinched, just a little. But I caught it. You're mad at me? I said, voice low. For what? For ruining your little fantasy. For reminding you that you're not some kind of alpha male who stole another man's wife. You were just the next idiot on her list. His nostrils flared. Shut up. I smiled. Make me. He took half a step forward, and for a second, I actually thought he was going to swing. But then. Are you still trying to fight over me? Both of us turned. Rachel was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, looking bored out of her mind. Boys, 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 she sighed, shaking her head. This is honestly pathetic. Eric turned to her, his expression unreadable. You lied to me, he said, his voice quiet now. Rachel shrugged. Yeah. And? Eric blinked. And? Rachel let out a dramatic sigh. Oh, please. Grow up. We had fun, didn't we? Eric's face twisted. I was in love with you. Rachel's lips curled into a smirk. That sounds like a you problem. That was it. That was the moment Eric finally broke. His entire body went rigid. His face shifted from hurt to rage in an instant. And just like that, Rachel lost him, too. I could see it in his eyes. The realization. Eric had spent 2 years thinking he had won something. That he had taken something from me. That he was special. But now. Now he knew the truth. He was nothing to her. Just another useful idiot. I clapped him on the shoulder. Tough break, man. Then I turned back to Rachel. I'll be home later to get my things, I said. Rachel rolled her eyes. Ugh, fine. Just don't touch my stuff. Eric was still staring at her, like he was seeing her for the very first time. Like he couldn't believe he had wasted 2 years on this woman. And me? I smiled. Because for the first time in years, I was free. I walked out of that clinic with a clear mind, the weight of her lies finally off my shoulders. Rachel? Dead to me. Eric? Completely irrelevant. But I wasn't done yet. I wasn't going to leave quietly. By the time I got home, Rachel had already locked herself in the bedroom. Good. I didn't need to talk to her. I needed to prepare. I sank onto the couch, pulled out my phone, and got to work, screenshots, emails, bank statements, every last shred of evidence I had. Because here's the thing. I wasn't just leaving. I was going to destroy her. She thought she was untouchable, that she could do whatever the hell she wanted and walk away without consequences. She was about to learn otherwise. The next morning, I was up early. Rachel finally came downstairs, yawning, wearing one of my old t-shirts. I almost laughed. The act wasn't going to work anymore. She spotted me at the table, laptop open, papers spread out in front of me, and let out an annoyed sigh. Oh God, she groaned. Are you seriously still being dramatic about this? I looked up at her, completely calm. I already filed for divorce. She blinked. Just for a second. Then she snorted. Oh, please, she muttered, rolling her eyes. Like you have the guts. I slid a folder across the table. Rachel glanced down. Then froze. Because sitting right on top of that stack of paperwork was proof. Proof of everything. Her affair with Eric. Her spending habits. Bank transfers to a hotel she swore she had never been to. And the prenup. The one she had laughed off when we got married, thinking it didn't matter. It did. Rachel's face went pale. What is this? I leaned back, stretching my arms. This? I said casually. Oh, just some fun little documents that say you get nothing. Her jaw clenched. That's not. Oh, and by the way. I cut in, reaching for my phone. I already sent copies to your dad. Rachel's eyes went wide. You're lying. I smirked. Check your messages. Her hands trembled as she snatched her phone off the counter. She unlocked it, scrolling frantically through her texts. And then, I saw it. The moment she found it. The moment Frank had responded. You disgust me. You are not my daughter anymore. Rachel staggered backward. Her eyes snapped to mine, and for the first time, I saw something I had never seen before. Fear. Pure, unfiltered fear. You're ruining my life, she whispered. I smiled. No, Rachel. You did that to yourself. She opened her mouth to argue. But before she could get a word out, the front door slammed open. And standing there, eyes burning with fury, was Eric. Rachel sucked in a sharp breath. What are you doing here? Eric stormed forward and threw something onto the table. A crumpled envelope. Rachel hesitated. Then picked it up. Tore it open. Her eyes darted across the paper inside. Then her entire body went still. Slowly, she looked up at Eric, horrified. Eric's voice was dangerously low. You played me. Rachel swallowed hard. Eric. You made me think I was the father. My eyebrows shot up. I turned to Rachel, grinning. Wait a minute. He's not the dad. Rachel's hands were shaking. Eric, just. Eric slammed his fist on the table. Who is it? Rachel didn't answer. Because now, she didn't know who had control anymore. And for the first time in her miserable, selfish life, she was truly powerless. She stood there, gripping the test results, her face blank. Eric's breathing was heavy, his face red with rage, waiting for an answer. I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed, enjoying the show. You lied to me, Eric seethed. You swore it was mine. Rachel finally snapped out of it, shaking her head quickly, scrambling to regain control. Eric, listen. Who is the father? He roared. She flinched. And then. She did what she always did. She lied. It's yours, she stammered, forcing a shaky smile. The test must be wrong. We'll take another one. Eric's entire body stiffened. And that's when I saw it. The exact moment he finally understood. Rachel wasn't just a cheater. She wasn't just selfish. She was a black hole. She pulled in everyone who got too close, twisted them, drained them until there was nothing left. Eric took a slow step back. His breathing evened out. His expression shifted, not anger, not even pain anymore. Just cold. I gave up everything for you, he said quietly. Rachel froze. Eric's jaw tightened. I ended my relationship for you. I wrecked my friendships. I spent 2 years thinking you loved me. Rachel swallowed. Eric, I almost lost my job because of you. His voice sharpened, cutting through the silence like a blade. And you knew. You knew this whole time it wasn't mine. Rachel's mouth snapped shut. Because now, she knew she was out of options. Eric took another slow step back. Then he laughed. A short, bitter sound. Wow, he muttered. I thought I stole you from him. He turned to me. Our eyes met. I thought I won, he admitted. I smirked. How's that working out for you? Eric exhaled sharply, then turned back to Rachel. I regret everything. Rachel flinched, like he had slapped her. For once in her life, she had no comeback. No gaslighting. No fake tears. Nothing. Eric shook his head, stepping back. We're done. Rachel's face dropped. Wait. He ignored her. Without another word, he turned on his heel and stormed toward the door. And without looking back. He left. Just like that. Rachel panicked. She lunged forward, like she was about to chase after him. But before she could, I reached out and grabbed her wrist. Firm. Unshaken. She turned to me, wild-eyed. I smiled. And now? I said, my voice quiet, deliberate. You have no one. Her mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. But she had nothing left to say. The house of cards she had built. Completely. Collapsed. And me? I was free. Rachel stood frozen. Her wrist still caught in my grip. Her breathing uneven. For the first time since this entire nightmare started. She wasn't in control. No lies. No gaslighting. No fake tears to manipulate her way out. Just silence. I let go of her wrist. Slowly. Deliberately. She stepped back, blinking rapidly, her brain scrambling to process how things had gone so horribly wrong. Eric was gone. Frank had disowned her. And now? I was walking away, too. I took a deep breath, exhaling slowly. And then, finally, I spoke. You spent 2 years lying to me, I said, my voice eerily calm. 2 years sneaking around. 2 years laughing behind my back while I trusted you. She swallowed. Shut up. She did. For once. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice. I want you to feel this, I said. She tensed. I want you to remember this moment, I continued. Because this is the moment you finally realize. You're not special. You're not untouchable. You're not some master manipulator who can play people like puppets and walk away without consequences. Her lower lip quivered. Not in sadness. In rage. Good. She deserved to burn in it. I'm leaving, I said simply. And I'm taking my dignity, my money, and my future with me. Her eyes flashed. And that's when the real Rachel finally came out. Her face twisted in fury. You think you're better than me, she snapped. You're just some pathetic loser who never satisfied me. You were lucky to have me at all. I smiled. Calm. Unshaken. And yet, I said, tilting my head, I'm the one walking away with everything. And you? You have nothing. Rachel's face cracked. Pure, undiluted rage. I didn't stick around for the next excuse. The next insult. The next desperate attempt to claw back any control. I turned, grabbed my bag, and walked out the door. The next few weeks were a blur. I moved out. Changed my number. Blocked her on everything. Rachel tried. Oh, she tried. Voicemails. Emails. Even showing up at my work. But I ignored every single attempt. Because I was done. And for the first time in years, I felt free. A month later, I got one last update. Eric had left the state. Disappeared completely. Rachel? She was spiraling. Word got around that she had lost her job after a screaming match with her boss. Linda had stopped speaking to her. Frank still refused to acknowledge her existence. And me? I was happier than ever. Because I had finally learned the most valuable lesson of all. Some people don't deserve closure. They deserve to be left exactly where they destroyed themselves. And that's exactly what I did.